রেসপেক্টেড ফিজিশিয়ানস অ্যান্ড মেডিকেল স্টুডেন্টস, সবাইকে আজকের সায়েন্টিফিক সেশনে স্বাগতম। আজকের সায়েন্টিফিক সেশনটি অর্গানাইজেশনে আছি আমরা বিডি ফিজিশিয়ানস এবং আমাদের লাইফ পার্টনার এফডিএসআর স্টুডেন্টস উইং। আজকের টপিক খুবই ইম্পর্টেন্ট এবং আজকের টপিক বেসিক্যালি ছিল পার্কিনসন্স ডিজিজেই। আমরা চিন্তা করেছিলাম প্রথমে একটি পর্বে শেষ করব, কিন্তু পরবর্তীতে আমরা ডিসিশন নেই না, এই সেশনটি আমরা দুটি পর্বে শেষ করব। আজকের প্রথম পার্ট, আজকের টপিক হচ্ছে ক্লিনিক্যাল অ্যাপ্রোচ অ্যান্ড ইভালুয়েশন অফ পার্কিনসনিজম। আমাদের সাথে আজকে যুক্ত হয়েছেন স্পিকার হিসেবে ইন্ডিয়া থেকে ডক্টর প্রবীণ কুমার যাদব। ডক্টর প্রবীণ কুমার যাদব সিনিয়র কনসালটেন্ট অ্যান্ড অ্যাসিস্ট্যান্ট প্রফেসর, উনি নিউরোলজিস্ট। উনি এমডি করেছেন জেনারেল মেডিসিনে, উনি ডিএম করেছেন নিউরোলজিতে। এছাড়াও উনি এফআরসিপি করেছেন লন্ডন থেকে এবং এডিন থেকে, এবং এমআরসিপিও করেছেন লন্ডন থেকে। ডক্টর প্রবীণ কুমার যাদব এই ব্যাপারে নিউরোলজিতে একজন লিজেন্ডারি হিসেবে বিবেচিত হচ্ছেন এবং উনি ভবিষ্যতে ধরা হচ্ছে যে কান্ডারি হিসাবে। এবং সাথে আমাদের আজকে চেয়ারপারসন হিসেবে যুক্ত হয়েছেন প্রফেসর মতিউর রহমান। প্রফেসর মতিউর রহমান স্যার বাংলাদেশে নিউরোলজির জগতে একজন কিংবদন্তি। মতিউর রহমান স্যার এক্স ডিপার্টমেন্টাল হেড অফ নিউরো মেডিসিন, সিলেট এমএজি ওসমানী মেডিকেল কলেজ, এবং বর্তমানে স্যার সিলেটে মাউন্ট এডোরা হসপিটালে কর্মরত আছেন। আমি আজকের সেশনটি শুরু করার জন্য আমাদের আজকে চেয়ারপারসন প্রফেসর মতিউর রহমান স্যারকে আহ্বান জানাচ্ছি।
Thanks, Dr. Ehsan. Now I request Dr. Praveen Kumar Yadav to start your presentation. Please.
Thank you, sir, for the kind introduction. And I'm really happy that I'm able to present in this platform. And today, the topic is approach to Parkinsonism. So this topic will include not only the Parkinson disease, but also all the conditions which may mimic Parkinsonism. And so we'll have a broad approach, how to investigate, how to clinically examine these patients, as well as what is the evaluation when you see this condition in the busy OPD and clinic. So is my slide visible? Okay, thank you. So we'll start the topic now. So as we all know, Parkinson disease is an age-old disorder. It was first described in 1817 by Dr. James Parkinson. And after 37 years of its the description of Parkinson disease in its book called Shaking Palsy, Jean-Martin Charcot, who is also known as the father of French medicine, he described the features and named it as Parkinson disease after James Parkinson. So since then, we are knowing this disease and the clinical features of this disease. So as we all know, Parkinson disease is a disorder of the elderly, that is after 55 years. The prevalence is almost 1%. And at the age of 65 years, the prevalence becomes double, that is 2%. It is the second most common neurodegenerative disorder after dementia group of disorders. The peak age of onset is 60 years. The course of the disease may vary from 10 to 25 years. And in 5% of the patient, the Parkinson disease can occur in the younger age group also, that is less than 50 years as well. So based on the age of the onset, it can be divided as juvenile Parkinson disease, in which the onset is before 20 years, young onset Parkinson disease, that is before 40 years, and the standard or the classical Parkinson disease, which occurs at 60 years of age. The global prevalence of Parkinson disease, it is quite a prevalent disorder. The prevalence varies in different regions, and it ranges from almost 25 to 200 per lakh population. So this can be higher in the Western group, that is the Germans, the Americans it is high, and the Chinese population it is highly seen. And this is the prevalence scenario in India, the North, East, West, and South. So you are having studies from the East India, that is in West Bengal, where the prevalence ranges around 27 per lakh population. So the prevalence is varying from almost 20 to 200. So what are the risk factors of Parkinson disease? So there are few standard risk factors of Parkinson's disease. The most important is increasing age. So age more than 60 years is an independent risk factor for Parkinson's disease. Family history of Parkinson's disease, male gender, the Caucasian population, certain personality, especially the introverted personality, nervous, and those type of personality, there is increased risk of Parkinson's disease. And the most important risk factors are environmental risk factors. We have seen the toxins, herbicides, heavy metals like manganese and all those arsenic and all can mercury, which can produce Parkinson-like symptoms. Also repeated head injury and rural living. So these are the known risk factors of Parkinson's disease. Now it is seen that Parkinson's disease is more common in the male population, and you can see in this graph. So this shows the number of the cases. This is the age in the years. So you can see in the men after 50 years, the prevalence of Parkinson's disease increases rapidly. While in women also it increases, but is correspondingly almost half that of the increase seen in men. So it is more prevalent in men, and as the age increases, it becomes more and more common in the male population. So the etiology of Parkinson is heterogeneous. So there is no single definite etiology of Parkinson's disease. A lot of environmental factors has been postulated, like heavy metal, well water use, toxins, pesticides, all this can cause Parkinson's disease. There are high risk behaviors like boxing and head injuries, risk of head injuries, which can predispose to Parkinson's disease. There is genetic susceptibility. A lot of genes has been described which can cause Parkinson's disease, like the alpha-synuclein, the Parkin genes, etc. And low risk behavior. So the certain behavior are protective against Parkinson's disease. So the three things which may be protective is, one is caffeine intake, then smoking is supposed to reduce the risk of Parkinson's disease, NSAID use like Brufen, etc. And fourth is high uric acid level. However, this cannot be advocated in clinical practice. So the only thing which is found to have reduction in the risk of Parkinson's disease is increased physical activity. So if there is regular exercise, regular physical activity, then there is a high chance of, reduced chance of Parkinson's disease when the person grows old. So this is the most important genetic risk factor of Parkinson's disease. So that is the alpha-synuclein gene. So here in Parkinson's disease and certain other disorders, so there is mutation in the alpha-synuclein gene, which causes metabolic problems, and there is formation of protofibrils and various other deposition, which causes damage to the tissue. So you can see that wherever the alpha-synuclein gets deposited, this condition is called as alpha-synucleinopathies. So there are three common disorders in which you see alpha-synuclein deposition. The most common is Parkinson's disease. Then you are having dementia with Lewy bodies, which is also called as DLBD, and multisystem atrophy, MSA. So these three disorders are called as alpha-synucleinopathies. The other common disorder which causes degenerative disorders are tauopathies, that is tau deposition within the tissue. For example, in Alzheimer's disease, PSP, that is progressive supranuclear gas palsy, and CBGD, that is corticobasilar ganglionic degeneration. So these are the common tauopathies which we know. So Parkinson's disease is a alpha-synucleinopathy. Now, what is the role of, as we all know, there is deficiency in the dopaminergic neurons in the pars compacta in the brain. So what is the role of this dopamine, and why does it cause the phenotype of the physical features of Parkinson's disease? So you can see this is the substantia nigra, and this is the pars compacta. So you are having the dopamine here. So due to various mechanisms, be it toxins, be it environmental factors, be it genetic factors, and all these factors, there is degeneration of these neurons, and as a result, the dopamine is reduced. Because of the reduction in the dopamine, there is increased level of the acetylcholine, and this acetylcholine causes stimulation of the globus pallidum and the thalamus. We should remember that the thalamus to the, this is the cortex. So the thalamus to the cortex is an excitatory circuit, and the thalamus has a positive impact on the cortex to increase the movements. Now, because of the excess of the acetylcholine, GABA is released here, and this causes inhibition of the thalamus. So the thalamus cortical excitatory circuit is inhibited, and that results in reduction in the impulses to the spinal motor neurons and the muscles, and gives rise to the symptoms of rigidity, bradykinesia, and all other symptoms which are seen in Parkinson disease. So this is a very simplified diagram. There are a lot of complex mechanisms which are coming all the manifestations of Parkinson disease. So this, in this diagram, you can see this is the brainstem, midbrain area, and this is the substantia nigra pars compacta. So you can see normally there is the dopamine containing neurons here, so which are very dark, and you can see in the cut section here, you can see the dopamine containing neurons here. So these are very dark, and this is in Parkinson disease. You can see in the histology slide, the darkness is lost, and also in the cross section, you can see there is loss of the dopamine producing neurons. So this is the basic mechanism of Parkinson disease. This again shows the loss of the pigmentation in the Parkinson disease. So this is a normal substantia nigra, and you are seeing the pigmented neurons here. And in Parkinson disease, there is total loss of the pigmented neurons, as well as there is deposition of this intracytoplasmic eosinophilic material here, which is called as the Levy body, which is the classical bodies which are seen in Parkinson disease. So to summarize, this is the overall pathophysiology of Parkinson disease. It's again a very simplified diagram. So there may be genetic factors like alpha-synuclein gene, mutation of which causes protofibril deposition, and which gives rise to formation of the Levy bodies and neuronal death. Or it could be due to involvement of the ubiquitin proteasome pathway. So there is defects in the ubiquitin gene. As a result, there is accumulation of the substrates which are metabolized by this pathway, and which gives rise to formation of Levy body and neuronal death. Other mechanism could be mitochondrial involvement, genetic mutations, toxins, etc., which causes mitochondrial dysfunction, and there is oxidative damage, energy failure, and neuronal death. So there is a multiple mechanisms which taper down onto formation of neuronal Levy bodies, and thus damage of the neurons in the substantia nigra of the pars compacta. So this is the basic metabolism mechanism. Now, coming to the pathology, as we know, as I've already mentioned, there is deposition of Levy bodies and damage to the various structures of the brain. Now, there is a staging called as the Bragg staging, which tells us where the Levy bodies are deposited, and depending on the deposition of the Levy bodies, the symptoms of Parkinson disease arises. So we all know that one of the most earliest manifestation of Parkinson disease is autonomic involvement, as well as olfactory, that is involvement of the smell. So smell abnormalities can occur very early in Parkinson disease. So that is because of involvement of the olfactory bulb, as well as the brainstem due to Levy body deposition, which occurs in the initial stage, that is stage 1 and 2. In the second stage, there is sleep disturbances. So you get sleep disturbances, which is classical called as REM behavioral disorders, or it is called as RBD. So what happens in RBD is that the patient in sleep, they will be having violent dreams. They may be kicking the bed partner. They may be trying to strangulate, or they may be trying to running away, and they will be remembering all the dreams vividly. So when they wake up from the sleep, they can tell that somebody was attacking them, or somebody was chasing them, or all sort of dreams. So these dreams are classical of Parkinson disease and classically seen in synucleinopathies. So the three disorders like Parkinson disease, MSA, and DLBD, that is diffuse Levy body dementia, all these three will have REM behavioral disorder. So it's a very important diagnostic clue. If a patient comes with REM behavioral disorder, so these patients are having 60 to 80% chance of developing Parkinson disease in the future. So that is a very important diagnostic tool. So, and in the final stages, we can see that the Levy body get deposited everywhere. It is in the cortex and in the motor pathways, giving rise to the other manifestations. So based on the Levy body deposition, we can correlate the stages of the Parkinson disease. So nowadays there is lot of importance given to the genetic type of Parkinson with the help of whole exome sequencing. Now whole exome sequencing or genetic study is widely available. So this type of Parkinson disease can be easily identified by this test. It is also quite cheap and it is available in clinical practice. We use it routinely in our OPDs. So when do you do this genetic study? So whenever you see that a patient has a family history of Parkinson disease and the Parkinson disease is occurring less than 50 years of age. So very young onset Parkinson disease 50 to 40 years of age with a strong family history, then you should suspect that this is some genetic type of Parkinson, and you can do the whole exome sequencing for these genes, which can help us identify the cause of the Parkinson disease. So these are the various common genes. There can be autosomal dominant inheritance, autosomal recessive. The most common autosomal dominant is alpha-synuclein gene, and the most common autosomal recessive is Parkin gene. So this table will show all the Parkin genes, and we can see that autosomal recessive, and X-linked, 3 types of inheritance are there. Autosomal dominant, as I already told, alpha-synuclein, and the second most common is the LRRK2, that is leucine-rich kinase gene. So that is the second most common autosomal dominant, and the autosomal recessive most common is the Parkin gene. So these are the various genes, and when you do the genetic Parkinson panel, all these genes will be included, and you can have an exact diagnosis, what is the exact type of PARC mutation which the patient is having. Okay, so now we had a basic of about what is the pathology of Parkinson disease, how does it progress. Now we'll go in a broad aspect of Parkinsonism. So what is the difference between Parkinson disease and Parkinsonism? So it's the same as you see in Cushing's disease and Cushing's syndrome. So Cushing disease means the disease which occurs due to the adenoma of the pituitary, like basophilic adenoma of the pituitary. And Cushing syndrome is the same phenotype which you see due to various causes like steroid intake, some ectopic production like that. So similarly, Parkinson and Parkinsonism are different. So Parkinson is the exact disease which is characterized with due to the loss of the substantia nigra dopaminergic neuron, while Parkinsonism is the phenotype which can occur due to multiple causes, be it some encephalitis, be it some other atypical Parkinsonism, be it drug-induced Parkinsonism. So there are various causes. So this is the basic classification of Parkinsonism. Parkinsonism can be classified into 4 types. So type 1 is the classical Parkinson disease, which we see, which can be the sporadic one, or which can be the hereditary type or the genetic Parkinson, which I mentioned before. Then you are having the Parkinson plus syndrome, or these are also called as the atypical Parkinsonism. So plus means along with the Parkinson disease symptoms, that is, which I'll be explaining later on. So they will be having other symptoms of involvement of other part of neuraxis. So apart from the dopaminergic neurons, there is widespread involvement of the other part of the neuraxis. So the Parkinson plus are basically 4 types you have to know. This is for the PG students to know the Parkinson plus. You may be having exam cases as well of Parkinson plus. So the most important is PSP, that is progressive supranuclear gaze palsy. So PSP, it's also called as Steele-Richardson syndrome. Second is multi-system atrophy, MSA. So there can be 2 types, MSA-P if there is more of Parkinson feature, and MSA-C if there is more of cerebellar features. The third most common type is corticobasal degeneration, or it's also called as CBGD, corticobasal ganglionic degeneration. So there you'll have cortical involvement as well as basal ganglia involvement. And there is also diffuse Lewy body dementia, DLBD. So these are the 4 common types of Parkinson plus. Rest of it are not very common. Now the third group, so we had Parkinson, then we had Parkinson plus. Now we are having third group, that is Heredodegenerative Parkinsonism. So here you should remember few important cases which we have already, most of us may have seen. One is Huntington's disease. Second is Wilson disease. We know that Wilson disease will have dystonia, tremor, Parkinsonism-like features along with liver involvement. So Wilson disease is one common type. In Wilson disease, we know that there is copper deposition inside the brain. Now there is iron deposition in the brain, which is called as NBIA, that is brain iron accumulation, neurodegeneration with brain iron accumulation. It was also known as Hallervorden-Spatz in the past. Now, because of the Nazi controversy, like in Wegener's granulomatosis and Church-Strauss, the name has been changed. So similarly, the name of Hallervorden-Spatz has been changed to NBIA. So here there is iron accumulation. Wilson, you are having accumulation of copper. And then other common causes are like neuroacanthocytosis, in which you will have peripheral smear showing acanthocytes, and then patient may have Parkinsonism, dystonia, chorea, and all those features. So these are the heredodegenerative group of Parkinson disease, Parkinsonism. Now the fourth type and very important clinical type is secondary Parkinsonism or symptomatic Parkinsonism. So what are the symptomatic Parkinsonism which we commonly see in our practice? So one is encephalitis. So I am sure you must have seen patients with Japanese encephalitis. So they will have, in Japanese encephalitis, you will having a febrile illness, and followed by that there will be involvement of the basal ganglia and thalamus. So the patient will present with a akinetic and rigid syndrome with lot of tremors and stiffness. So that is a post-encephalitic Parkinsonism. Then you may be having SSP, that is post-measles. One very important cause of secondary Parkinsonism is slow virus infection or prion disease. So this may present with rapid onset of dementia, Parkinsonism, and the hallmark is myoclonics. So myoclonic jerks with dementia and Parkinsonism, rapidly progressive. So that could be Creutzfeldt-Jakob or prion disease. Then very important, drugs. So there are a lot of medications which can present with Parkinsonism like symptoms. I'll give you the list of the common drugs which we see in practice where patients develop Parkinsonism like features. Then toxins, which I've already mentioned, manganese, carbon monoxide, and all those things can present with Parkinsonism like features. Very important common things which we see in practice is multi-infarct state. You must have seen patients with multiple infarcts in the brain or cerebral small vessel disease. This scan may be showing some lacunar, multiple lacunar infarcts, and the patient is having difficulty in walking, slowness of the gait. But the tremors are not much, and the other features of Parkinsonism are not there. But they are having something called as lower body Parkinsonism in the legs. Similarly, one more common thing is normal pressure hydrocephalus, which is also called as NPH. So they'll also have lower body Parkinsonism. So these are the common cause of secondary Parkinsonism. So to summarize, Parkinson can be the Parkinson disease, which can be sporadic or genetic. Then we are having Parkinson plus, which has the four most common types. Then we are having the heredodegenerative Parkinsonism, which include Wilson disease and all those deposition disorders, Huntington disease, etc. And then the secondary Parkinsonism, which can be due to infections, drugs, which can be due to toxins, which can be due to multiple infarcts or normal pressure hydrocephalus, etc. So this is the broad classification. So this picture is just to show toxin mediated Parkinsonism. So you can see these are the frozen addicts. So they have been called as the frozen addicts. Suddenly after the exposure to, they were addicts and they were taking, they had an impurity in their addictive substance, which is called as MPTP, methyl tetrahydrofolate pyridine. And this substance caused sudden onset of Parkinsonism in all of this. So this is one example in which toxins can induce Parkinson's. Now, this is a very important list, very important in clinical practice for every one of us. So this are the drugs which causes drug-induced Parkinsonism. So the most common is typical antipsychotics. Now we are having a lot of atypical antipsychotics. So the drug use, the antipsychotic induced Parkinsonism has really come down. But these are the common drugs, the older drugs like chlorpromazine, fluphenazine, and fluvoxamine. All those drugs can cause severe Parkinsonism. Nowadays, atypical antipsychotics are used, but still risperidone, aripiprazole, olanzapine, and all those drugs can even cause Parkinsonism. The drugs and atypical antipsychotics which has least Parkinsonism are clozapine and quetiapine. So whenever you are having a patient with Parkinson disease or Parkinsonism having psychosis, it is better to use clozapine and quetiapine rather than these drugs because this may worsen the Parkinsonism. Then dopamine depleted drugs, antiemetics like metoclopramide, and this drug you should be very, very careful, levosulpiride. So in India, we are having combinations with pantoprazole with levosulpiride, rabiprazole with levosulpiride. And believe me, almost every week I see at least 3-4 patients who come with tremors and rigidity and acute onset of Parkinsonism. And most of the time, levosulpiride is the culprit. So this is very important drug. All the prides, levosulpiride, etopride, cisapride, most of them can induce Parkinsonism. Then we use commonly flunarizine for migraine. So that is again one common drug which can cause Parkinson-like syndrome. Then for vertigo, we use cinnarizine, and it is sometimes used for long term. So at that time, this can also cause Parkinsonism. Anti-epileptic drugs, sodium valproate is well known to cause Parkinsonism-like features. Lithium can cause Parkinsonism-like features. So whenever you get an acute onset of Parkinsonism of less than 2 to 3 months duration, and there are some atypical features. What are the atypical features which make us suspect that we are facing drug-induced Parkinsonism is bilateral symmetric Parkinsonism. If you're getting bilaterally symmetric Parkinsonism, and if there is tremor dominant Parkinsonism, and if there is involvement of the oral, perioral areas, oral dyskinesias are there, then you should definitely go through a detailed investigation through the drug list, because most of the time it may be some medications which may be inducing the Parkinsonism. And if you stop the medicines, most of the time the problem resolves, and then you can start some triacylphenidil or anticholinergic medication, and these patients dramatically improve once the inducing agent is stopped. However, it may take 3 to 6 months for proper resolution of the symptoms. So the drug chart is very, very important. Now, these are the risk factors. Whenever you see elderly patients with affective disorders, mental retardation, male sex, all these patients may have more chances of drug-induced Parkinsonism. Now coming to Parkinson disease proper. So we have gone through the spectrum of Parkinsonism. What are the causes of Parkinsonism and what are the key features? Now I will go into Parkinson disease. How do you diagnose Parkinson disease and how do you clinically differentiate it from the other causes of Parkinson disease, which I have mentioned. So this is the very important criteria for diagnosis of Parkinson disease. It is called as UK Brain Bank Diagnostic Criteria. It was postulated in 1992. And these are the classical features. So according to this, to diagnose Parkinsonism, you should have bradykinesia. So the most important feature is bradykinesia. Bradykinesia means slowness of the activity, slowness of the movement. So that should be the key feature. And along with that, there should be rigidity. Rigidity means uniform stiffness of the movement. And there should be resting tremor. So as we all know, tremor can be of different type. I'll tell you the approach of tremor in the next few slides. So there should be 4 to 6 hertz resting tremor and postural instability. So postural instability means they are having disbalance while walking and they are having tendency either to sway backwards or forwards while they are walking. So that is called as postural instability. So if there is slowness along with any one of this, you can say that this patient is having probably a Parkinsonism, and there should be some supportive evidence also. So what are the supportive criteria? If it is unilateral onset, so that is quite suggestive of Parkinson disease. So we know that Parkinson disease is a asymmetric disorder. Though it is a metabolic disorder, usually the metabolic disorders are symmetric, but Parkinson disease is one metabolic onset disorder due to loss of dopaminergic neuron, degenerative disorder, which is asymmetric. So degenerative disorder which is asymmetric is Parkinson disease. So they are having unilateral onset, rest tremor. It should be a progressive disorder. So gradually Parkinson disease is a progressive disorder. So there should be progression of the symptom. And one important feature is response to levodopa. So this is almost diagnostic. If you give patient levodopa at a very good dosage, good dose should be around somewhere around 800 to 1000 mg. If you're giving 800 to 1000 mg, and if the patient responds well to the medicine, it is likely to be Parkinson disease. So it's almost diagnostic. And second is levodopa-induced dyskinesia. So you must have seen patients in Parkinson disease who are on medications for more than 5 to 6 years. They develop this involuntary movement. So this is called as dyskinesia. So if the patient is developing dyskinesia on levodopa, so that is again diagnostic that this patient is having Parkinson disease. So with these features, you can safely diagnose Parkinson disease. However, you have to exclude this disorder. So these are the things which has to be excluded. So what are the things to be excluded? You should exclude stroke. You should exclude head injuries. You should exclude encephalitis. You should exclude drugs. You should exclude any positive cerebellar features, any positive plantar, extensor plantar. You should exclude NPH, that is normal pressure hydrocephalus. So toxins, drugs, everything has to be excluded. Then only you can diagnose Parkinsonism and Parkinson disease. So it's a diagnosis of exclusion. So you have to go through the drug history, and wherever required, you should do the imaging to rule out other causes of Parkinson disease. So this is the most commonly used criteria. However, many other criteria have come over. So the latest one is the MDSI, that is Movement Disorder Society, MDS criteria in 2015. Again, they say that bradykinesia is most important. So slowness is the most important thing, and there should be rigidity or rest tremor. You should rule out the exclusion criteria which has been given before. And the common things are levodopa-induced dyskinesias and all those things which I've already mentioned. Good response to syndopa, And one more thing which can be done in the bedside or which is easily available is olfactory loss. So if there is loss of smell, so that again points out towards Parkinson disease. So I'll not go into the details of this. So this is the second criteria, and this is the easiest criteria, and this is what we can use in our clinical practice. So here you can remember the 6 cardinal signs of Parkinson disease. So this is good for the postgraduate students also. You can remember it. The mnemonic is TRAP double F. So TRAPFF. So T stands for tremor, that is resting tremor. R stands for rigidity. A stands for the A of bradykinesia, or you can also remember as akinesia. And P stands for postural loss. F stands for flex posture, and F, again one F is for freezing. So TRAPFF, you can get the 6 cardinal features of Parkinson disease. And if you are having 2 of resting tremor and bradykinesia, you are having definite Parkinsonism. And if you are having resting tremor or bradykinesia alone, it is probable and possible if there is 2 of the 4. So if out of this 4, if you are having 2, it is possible. So with this criteria, you can diagnose Parkinsonism. At least you can remember TRAP double F. So this can be easily remembered, and you can apply in your patients. So these are the classical features. T for tremor at rest, which we know that in Parkinsonism, the tremor will occur at rest. And bradykinesia. So how do we examine for bradykinesia? You ask the patient to hold the hands like this, and the patient is made to do like this. So this has to be done at least for 15 times. And if you see that the movement gradually comes down, so initially it is full and then gradually it comes down and it becomes like this and slow. So the amplitude reduces and the speed also reduces. So that is classical of bradykinesia. So this is how you test in the examination. For resting tremor, you have to ask the patient to keep the hand on the lap and tell them to relax, and then you have to look for the tremors. So usually in Parkinsonism, it is a resting tremor. It is unilateral in onset, and we get the classical Pillroning tremor. So it's a rotatory tremor involving the metacarpophalangeal and the finger joints, and it is a oscillating, rotating tremor involving distally. Now, the third important thing is rigidity. So for rigidity, you can check in the wrist. You can move the wrist like this, rotate it very slowly, and you can also look in the elbows. All the joints can be examined. So in Parkinson disease, you'll have a lead pipe rigidity, that is a continuous resistance which is seen. So how do you differentiate it from spasticity? Spasticity will be a velocity dependent process. So you have to do it very rapidly, and you can see that towards the end of the movement, you will get the catch. So that is called as clasp knife rigidity, which is classical of spasticity. So spasticity suggests a pyramidal disorder, while a rigidity, that is a continuous uniform resistance or lead pipe rigidity, suggests a extrapyramidal disorder like Parkinsonism. Sometimes if there is tremor, so you'll get the classical cogwheeling because of the lead pipe rigidity, which is intervened by the tremor in between. So then you will get the cogwheeling, which is seen. And this is how you examine for postural instability. Ideally, you have to stand in front of a wall, and then you have to stand behind the patient. You have to explain the patient that you are going to pull the patient backwards, and the patient has to stand steadily. Now you pull the patient backward by a strong, you have to give a strong push backwards. Usually the patient can take up to 2 steps backward and then he stabilizes. But in Parkinson disease and the other Parkinsonism syndromes, they may take 3 to 4 steps, and sometimes they may fall back also. So that is suggestive of postural instability. So this is how you examine for the cardinal features of Parkinson disease. Other features of Parkinson disease are mask facies, which you know, there will be reduced blinking. You can look for the saccades. Saccade means you have to ask the patient, place the hands like this, and ask the patient to look in the 2 extremes. So normally you cannot see the eye moving. So the movement will be very quick and they'll reach the target immediately. But in Parkinson, the saccades will be slow and broken. Similarly, pursuit, you ask the patient to follow the eyes. So normally it will be a uniform following of the eyes, but in Parkinson disease, you'll see that the pursuit is broken. So broken saccades and pursuits will be there, mask facies will be there. The eye blinking will be reduced. There may be tremors around the mouth and the face, and there may be tongue tremors as well. Now, essential tremor, I'll come to the detail how you differentiate from the other disorders. And and there may be skin changes. You may be getting seborrheic dermatitis on the face, and the patient may be having a flexed posture. The gait, when you examine the patient, the gait will be a narrow-based gait, and there will be short steps. There may be freezing of the gait. Freezing means once they are walking, they'll freeze in the point, and then they may be stuck, and then they'll start walking again. So this is freezing of the gait and festinating gait, which may all be seen. So these are the head to foot examination features of Parkinson disease. So broadly, Parkinson disease. So the classical Parkinson disease I'm speaking about, there are three types of Parkinson disease. One is tremor dominant Parkinson disease, in which you will see that the patient is having tremors. One is the akinetic rigid Parkinsonism, in which the patient is having less tremor but severe rigidity and then very slow and akinetic. And third is the patient has repeated falls and gait difficulty. However, the tremor is not much. So these are the various forms of Parkinson disease which you can see in your clinical practice. Now we had spoken about the various motor manifestations of Parkinson disease. Till 1 or 2 decades back, we just focused on the motor manifestation: bradykinesia, slowness, tremors, flex posture, slow gait. All these were the main features. But now we have realized that Parkinson disease, apart from the motor system, it affects most of the other systems also. And these findings are very, very important. It's also called as the preclinical or the pre-motor symptoms of Parkinson disease. So constipation, smell abnormalities, REM behavioral disorder, RBD, which I've already mentioned, that is the sleep, violent sleep dreams, which the patient remembers, and depression. So these 4 things are the pre-motor symptoms. So that means they can occur even before the onset of the motor manifestation or the tremor and all those things. This will occur earlier. So this is very important to recognize these disorders. So whenever you get a patient with REM behavioral disorder, then you should, or a smell abnormality, you should also think that whether the patient is going to develop Parkinson disease or some sort of Parkinsonism in the near future. So these are the pre-motor symptoms. Now these are the non-motor symptoms. So the Parkinson symptoms can be divided as pre-motor, non-motor, and motor. Motor I have already described, that is the TRAP double F. Premotor are these 4 symptoms, and these are the non-motor symptoms. So what are the common non-motor symptoms? The most common neuropsychiatric manifestation which can manifest in non-motor symptom is depression. Second is anxiety, psychosis, hallucinations, and all those things can occur. Other sleep disorders like restless leg syndrome, PLMS, and all those things can occur. Insomnia may be a manifestation. Autonomic symptoms, bladder symptoms may be there. Sexual dysfunction may be a prominent manifestation. GIT symptoms may be there. They may be having increased salivation. There may be pain and paresthesias of the limb. Weight loss, weight gain may be there. Frozen shoulder may be one very common manifestation which can be seen in the Parkinson patient. So Parkinson disease is not just a motor disorder. It involves the various neuraxis and has multi-system involvements. So that is what this slide tells about. Now coming to the Parkinson tremor. So this is the key tremor in any patient with Parkinson disease. The tremor is resting tremor. So whenever you get a resting tremor in a patient involving the upper limb or the lower limb, then you have to be highly suspicious that this could be Parkinson disease. Few other features of the Parkinson tremor is something called as a re-emergent tremor. So once you see that the patient is keeping the hand in resting position, you are getting the classical Parkinson tremor, which will be something like this. Then you ask the patient to hold the hand like this. So you can see that the tremor disappears for some time and then it will reappear. So the lack of tremor for more than 1 second, once you hold it in that postural position, and then reappearance is called as re-emergent tremor. So this re-emergent tremor could be a very important feature of Parkinson disease and helps us in diagnosis of the Parkinson disease along with resting tremor. So you can remember the 2R, that is the resting and the re-emergent tremor, which may be a very important feature of Parkinson disease. Now, one important thing which I tell all my physician colleagues is that every tremor is not Parkinson disease. So we often see that the patient is admitted in critical care, elderly patient admitted in critical care having tremors. Patient is having COPD, multiple inhalers, salbutamol and all those, and then having tremors. So these are not Parkinson disease. So every tremor is not Parkinsonism. We see patients getting started on levodopa, carbidopa, triacylphenidil, and develop all sort of psychosis and complications unnecessarily because the patient just has tremor. So do not take that every tremor is Parkinsonism. Tremor has to be evaluated properly, and then it could be due to many other causes which may be giving rise to the tremor. For example, most common is physiological tremor. You must have seen patients who are very anxious, and then when you ask them, you can see that they are having tremors. You can see the extremities are very cold, and there is tachycardia also. So this is anxiety neurosis, which can again cause tremor. Similarly, if you see a patient having tremors, proptosis, and there is some exophthalmos, heart rate is high, the extremities are warm. So this is thyrotoxicosis. So that again causes tremor. So all tremor are not Parkinsonism. Then other causes of tremor is cerebellar tremor. We know that cerebellar disorders can cause tremor. Usually cerebellar tremor is intention tremor. So when you try to touch the target, so there will be shooting, undershooting, overshooting. And when you try to touch the node, there will be tremor. So this is called as intention tremor, which may be a classical feature of cerebellar tremor. Now look at the frequency of cerebellar tremor. It is very less. So it is less than the Parkinsonism tremor, 2 to 4 hertz. And it may affect the head also. And then in the head, you get the classical yes, yes tremor in cerebellar tremor. While in Parkinsonism, it is not the yes, yes tremor. And usually Parkinsonism will not cause head tremor. So head tremor is quite unusual for Parkinson disease. Then you are having other causes of tremor. Very important is essential tremor. I'll tell you how to differentiate Parkinsonism from Parkinson disease from essential tremor. Later slides. Then you are having tremors called as orthostatic tremor, in which when the patient stands, when they are standing still, they are having tremors of the lower limb. They are having unable to stand, and when they walk, the tremor subsides. So that is orthostatic tremor. And tremor is not always from the brain. So that also has to be remembered. Tremor could be due to peripheral cause. So if you are having a severe neuropathy of the upper limb, if you are having motor neuron disease, you may also have tremor. So that is called as mini polymyoclonus. So this is called as, this type of tremor is called as mini polymyoclonus, which may be due to the LMN involvement, that is lower motor neuron involvement due to neuropathy or motor neuron disease. So every tremor is not due to the basal ganglia involvement. Then there is something, one more important thing is dystonic tremor. So when you see that you keep the patient's hand like this, if you see that there is abnormal posturing of the limb, so limb is going in a dystonic posturing and you are getting tremors. So this abnormal posturing and then tremor is called as a dystonic tremor. So this could be seen in Wilson disease or some other dystonic disorders which can cause tremors. So these are the various differential diagnoses of tremors. I think I will focus a bit more on tremor because it's a very common manifestation and always mistaken as Parkinson disease and also given unnecessary treatment. So whenever you get a tremor, you have to divide whether it's a resting tremor or an action tremor. So resting tremor means in the resting posture. Action tremor means during action. So action tremor can be of various types. One is postural tremor. So when you keep like this, it is called as postural tremor. Second is kinetic tremor, when you are trying to move the limb. So when you get this tremor, it is called as kinetic tremor. Then third is isometric tremor. That is when you are trying to hold some object. If you're getting the tremor, it is called as isometric tremor. And sometimes it may be task specific. For example, while writing, you may be getting a tremor. While holding the glass, you may be getting a tremor. So that is task specific tremor. So whenever you get a tremor, try to find out what type of tremor it is. So this is the protocol of how to approach a tremor. So you'll ask, what is the age of onset? What is the evolution of tremor? So did it start in one side? Did it start in the hand or the feet? Did it spread to the opposite side? Did it start in the neck or the hands first? So the semiology or the progression of the tremor you have to find out. What is the alcohol and drug sensitivity? What medications relieve the tremor? What medication worsen the tremor? Does it reduce with alcohol intake? If it's a male patient, does it reduce with alcohol intake? What is the past medical history? Very important. Whether the patient is a diabetic, whether it's a COPD patient, whether the patient is an alcoholic patient, whether there is any underlying thyroid disorder, and family history. So family history of tremor could be suggestive of essential tremor or some Parkinson disease also. So that has to be seen. Then the distribution of the tremor, which part of the body is involved? What are the activation procedures? So does the tremor increase on posture? Does it increase on movement? Does it increase on resting? That has to be seen. And then the tremor frequency, whether it's a low frequency tremor like a cerebellar tremor, or it's a very high frequency tremor like a physiological tremor, or it is an intermediate frequency tremor like a Parkinson disease tremor. So that has to be seen. And then you have to examine the patient for evidence of any Parkinsonism like bradykinesia, rigidity and all. So if that is there, then it's a Parkinsonism disorder. If nothing is there, then it's unlikely to be Parkinsonism. Whether there are any cerebellar signs along with the tremor, so it could be a cerebellar disorder. Whether there is some abnormal posturing or dystonia, so it could be a dystonic tremor. So these things you have to try to find out. And then you are having the investigations like MRI and the receptor imaging and blood parameters, thyroid function test and ceruloplasmin, depending on the diagnosis which you are considering. So this is the broad overview how you should evaluate a patient with tremor. So these are the three common tremors which we see in our clinical practice: Parkinsonism tremor, essential tremor and dystonic tremor. So how do you differentiate? So Parkinsonism, as I already told, it's rest tremor. Then on keeping like this, you will get the re-emergent tremor. Parkinsonism tremor can affect the jaws, it can affect the lips, it can affect the tongue. However, the jaw tremor in Parkinson disease will be on closure of the mouth. So when you keep the mouth closed, the tremor will be there in the jaw. So that is Parkinson tremor. However, in essential tremor also, you may be having involvement of the jaw, the tongue, and also the head. But the jaw tremor in essential tremor, on opening the mouth, you will be having the jaw tremor in essential tremor, while Parkinson disease, the tremor will be on closing the mouth. Similarly, head tremor is more frequent in essential tremor, while in Parkinson disease, you will never get head tremor. So that is one important feature. Essential tremor, you will not get resting tremor. It will be postural tremor. So when you keep like this, you will get the severe tremor in essential tremor. It will be more involving the proximal wrist, while in the Parkinson disease, it will be distal tremor. So with these features, you can, and it will be bilateral. Usually essential tremor will be bilateral, while Parkinson tremor will be unilateral. So these are the basic differences between essential tremor and Parkinson tremor. However, sometimes it may be very difficult to differentiate essential tremor from Parkinson tremor also, because in the later stages, essential tremor can be resting tremor also, and it may be there in postural and all the movements. So it becomes quite difficult. So then comes the use of dopamine receptor scanning. So new dopamine scanning are available, which may be helping us differentiate essential tremor from Parkinson tremor. Now, dystonic tremor. Dystonic tremor, I told there will be abnormal posturing of the hands. I guess you have seen patients with cervical dystonia. So they'll be having movement of the neck. So neck will be in abnormal position and there will be tremors of the head also. So this is dystonic tremor. So dystonic tremor and essential tremor, how will you differentiate? While lying down, dystonic tremor will disappear, while essential tremor will be present while lying down also. The head tremor in essential tremor will be present in lying down also, while dystonic tremor will reduce on lying down. So with these features, you can find out what type of tremor the patient is having. So this is one, again, very simple test which can be done in the bedside. You can ask the patient to make this spiral. So you see the spiral, this is called as Archimedes spiral. So in a Parkinson disease, as you all know, there will be micrographia. So the handwriting becomes smaller and smaller, while in a cerebellar disease, the handwriting becomes larger. So it's called as macrographia. In essential tremor, you can see there is a regular tremor in between. So the circle is uniformly distorted, uniformly, it is present everywhere. While in a dystonic tremor, you see that at the point there is the dystonia appears, and then the circle is, there is loss of the line here. Here again dystonia appears, there is loss of line again here, and then here there is normal line. So this irregular circle with breakage of the lines is suggestive of a dystonic tremor. So this circle making can also help us differentiate the type of the tremor. So essential tremor, I have already discussed. So at least the patient should have 3 years tremor involving both the upper limbs, and there can be head, voice, and lower limb involvement. Now, one more important thing is essential tremor will involve the voice. So you can ask the patient to say a line continuously, and then you can see there is a break in the voice. So that is again suggestive of essential tremor, which is quite, the voice tremor is not much seen in Parkinson disease. So I think we have finished about tremor and Parkinson disease. So how do we, once you diagnose Parkinsonism, how do we stage the Parkinson disease? So Parkinson disease can be staged into 5 stages. So there is staging by Howe and Yar. So first stage is unilateral. Second stage is bilateral. Third stage is bilateral with postural involvement. Fourth is severely disabled patient who requires support to walk. And final stage is wheelchair bound. So these are the 5 stages of Parkinson disease depending on the involvement. So 1 is unilateral, 2 is bilateral, 3 is bilateral with postural involvement, 4 is able to walk but severely disabled, requires support, and 4th is wheelchair or bed-bound patients. Okay, so having gone through all the clinical features, all the parameters and the criteria of Parkinson disease, in a OPD, busy OPD or in the clinic, how do we approach this patient? So once you get these patients, you are suspecting Parkinson disease, you have to ask the history of the onset, the evolution of the symptom, what is the mode of progression of the disorders, whether there are any non-motor symptoms like REM behavioral disorder, autonomic symptoms, and all those things. You look for any plus symptoms. Plus means Parkinson plus, whether it is some sort of Parkinson plus disease. You look for systemic disorders like thyroid, other disorders, whether the patient is having inhalers, COPD, and all those things. You ask the history of the family history of the patient. You draw a family tree, who all are affected with tremors or some sort of Parkinsonian disorders. You take a detailed drug history of the previous 6 months, what all medication the patient is taking. So these are the basic things which you should do whenever you see a patient with suspected Parkinsonism. Now I'll go to, we have completely gone through the Parkinson disease symptoms. Now, how do you, when do you suspect whether it is Parkinson disease or it is Parkinson plus or atypical Parkinsonism? Now, why is it important that we should know whether it's a Parkinson disease or a Parkinson plus? It is very important because most of these Parkinson plus disorders are rapidly progressive disorders. Most of them are fatal disorders. And usually the patient is incapacitated in a matter of 1 to 2 years. Now, the importance is that the prognosis is bad compared to that of Parkinson disease. Second is the medications, whichever you are using, the carbidopa, the levodopa, they are not going to act properly for these patients because the basic mechanism is not just involvement of the dopaminergic pathway, but other pathways are also involved. So that is the important to prognosticate this patient and talk to the patient relatives regarding that your patient is having Parkinson plus and not Parkinson disease. Because once a patient has Parkinson disease, you know that you can give the patient the medication, the patient is going to respond properly in the initial 5 years and is going to have a very prolonged treatment, and patient will not have a very bad prognosis in the initial stage. But if it's a Parkinson plus, then the outcome is going to be bad, and you can explain the patient relatives initially itself. So what are the features which can tell us that this patient is having Parkinson plus and not just Parkinson disease? One is symmetric signs. So if there is bilateral symmetric involvement, if there is early dementia, so if the patient has severe dementia, which is very early into the onset, usually Parkinson dementia occurs later on. So it will occur at least few years after the onset of the disorder. So if it is occurring in the first year, then it is likely to be atypical Parkinsonism. If there is fall within the first year, so Parkinsonism, usually the falls occur later on after 3 to 5 years. So if the fall is occurring within first year and the patient is having severe falls, injuries right from the onset of the symptoms, then it is likely to be atypical Parkinsonism. Early autonomic failure. You see a patient with a Parkinsonism-like feature and you see that there is BP drop. Patient is developing recurrent syncope, pre-syncope-like features. Patient is having erectile dysfunction and autonomic failure, which is occurring within 1 to 2 years of the onset of the disease. So this is unlikely to be Parkinson disease. It is a sort of Parkinson plus syndrome. If the patient is having cortical sensory loss and other symptoms, I'll giving you examples of each of this, so which will make it more clear. So these are the things which you should look for. So if there is rapid progression of the disorder, there is or there is complete absence of progression of the disorder, it stays static. There is early bulbar dysfunction. So there is speech abnormality, swallowing dysfunction, which occurs early. There is inspiratory deficiency or respiratory dysfunction early. if there is severe autonomic involvement early within 5 years, and there is recurrent fall, there is disproportionate anticolis. So what is anticolis? Anticolis means we know that in Parkinsonism there is forward flexion, but if there is severe flexion in the trunk within 1 year of the illness, so that is likely to be atypical Parkinsonism, because for Parkinsonism to be completely flexed like this, it will take at least 5 to 10 years. So if it occurs within 1 to 2 years, then it is likely to be atypical Parkinsonism. If there is pyramidal signs, cerebellar signs, you are seeing that the reflexes are very brisk, plantar is extensor, there is lot of cerebellar signs, there is dementia, and there is symmetric involvement, both sides are involved, both upper limb, both lower limb, then it is likely to be Parkinson plus and not a typical, typical Parkinson disease. So as I already told, there are 4 types of Parkinson plus. So one is PSP, that is progressive supranuclear gaze palsy or Steele-Richardson syndrome. So what is the classical feature of PSP? So the 2 classical feature of PSP is, one is recurrent backward falls. So most of these patients will fall backwards within the first year of the illness. Second is vertical gaze palsy. So you ask the patient to look up gaze and down gaze and also lateral gaze. So you can see that the lateral gaze is well preserved, is slow but well preserved, but the up gaze and the down gaze are really affected and the down gaze is lost. So these patients are likely to be having a PSP. We know that the midbrain in the brainstem is the area which controls the vertical gaze. So in PSP, the midbrain is atrophied. So because of that, there will be vertical gaze palsy. So this patient will classically come with the symptom that they are not able to climb downstairs because the down gaze is affected. So this is a feature of progressive supranuclear gaze palsy. Along with that, you will see a lot of other features like frontal lobe involvement will be there, some memory loss will be there. All those things are there, but it is not very common. So these are the 2 common symptoms. Now, other Parkinson plus which is commonly seen is dementia with Lewy body. So dementia with Lewy body, again, you can see there will be Parkinsonism features, but other features are dementia. Second is visual hallucinations. So visual hallucination is a very prominent symptom of dementia with Lewy body, and they will be having fluctuating cognition. So you can see that some days the patient is very good, morning the patient is good, evening the patient worsens. So there is fluctuation in the cognition. So these features could tell you that the patient is having a Parkinson plus like dementia with Lewy body. The third common type of Parkinson plus is cortico-basal degeneration. So there is basal ganglia involvement plus cortical involvement. So basal ganglia, you will have involvement of the opposite side limb. So there will be tremor and all the Parkinsonism feature, but there will be cortical involvement also. So memory loss will be there. And 2 classical features are alien limb syndrome. So alien limb syndrome means the patient loses the control of the limb and the limb will be moving on its own. So you can see that the patient is sitting and talking to you, but the limb is getting elevated like this. So this is called as levitation, and sometimes it may be moving on its own. So it's called as an alien limb phenomena. So whenever you get alien limb phenomena and cortical involvement, so there may be apraxia also. Apraxia means the patient, suppose if ask them, how do you brush your teeth? So they will be not able to show a brush, how they brush the teeth. You ask them to show a tata, so they will be not be able to showing the tata. So this is called as apraxia. So they'll be having apraxia and alien limb phenomena along with a stiff limb, bradykinesia and tremors. So this could be suggestive of cortico-basal ganglionic degeneration. And the last type is MSA. So it's called as multi-system atrophy. So I've already told there are 2 types, MSA-P and MSA-C. So P means if there is more of Parkinsonism features, and C means there will be more of cerebellar features. So the classical feature of MSA is autonomic dysfunction. So it is seen that this patient with MSA will have severe autonomic dysfunction. The patient is sitting, the BP is 100/60. Once you make them stand, the BP falls to 70/40. And the patient develops severe giddiness and even may have a syncope. So this sort of severe autonomic dysfunction could be suggestive of a multi-system atrophy. And it's also seen in male patient that they may be having impotence and erectile dysfunction as a part of the autonomic involvement, maybe 5 to 10 years before the onset of the Parkinsonism symptoms. So autonomic involvement is the key to diagnosis of multi-system atrophy. So these are the features of multi-system atrophy: autonomic involvement, urinary involvement, fecal involvement, erectile dysfunction, and orthostatic hypotension. So all suggest a autonomic involvement. So the key features are PSP, you will get backward fall, vertical gaze palsy. If it is MSA, you will get autonomic involvement. If it is DLBD, you will get dementia with fluctuating cognition and hallucinations. And if it is a corticobasal ganglionic degeneration or CBGD, you will get the alien limb hand and the apraxias. So these features, if you can remember, you can diagnose most of the common Parkinson plus syndromes. So you can look at this patient. This is a patient with PSP. You can look at the stare. So there will be a stare of the eyes. And in this patient, there was vertical gaze palsy. So this is the normal stance of a patient. This you can see, this is called as anticolis. So there is severe flexion of the neck. So this patient had multi-system atrophy. So a type of Parkinson plus. You can see severe dysautonomia. There is loss of circulation in the fingers and there is cyanosis-like symptoms. So this is again cold, dusky hands, which is seen in multi-system atrophy because of the autonomic involvement. So you can see the limb is getting elevated here. So this is again the alien limb phenomena, which I said in CBGD, that is corticobasal ganglionic degeneration. You can see a tilt table being done and there is severe postal hypotension suggestive of multi-system atrophy. So all these features can tell us that the patient is having a atypical Parkinsonism. Psychiatric disorders, the patient may be thinking that some imposter is, the patient looks at the mirror and but finds that some imposter is there. So this could be suggestive of DLBD, diffuse Lewy body syndrome, in which you have a lot of psychiatric manifestation. There may be visual hallucinations which can be there in DLBD. So these all features are there. So I think we have done with Parkinson disease, Parkinson plus. Now the crucial question is, should all the patient with suspected Parkinsonism do a scan of the brain? The answer is no. If you are getting the typical features of Parkinson disease, like unilateral tremor, there is tremulousness is there, unilateral features, resting tremor is there, re-emergent tremor is there, and then you are finding all the other features of idiopathic Parkinson disease or the typical Parkinson disease, usually it's a clinical diagnosis. You do not need to do the scan. Even a CT scan is also not required. But you should do the MRI scan of the brain whenever you suspect there is a symmetric Parkinsonism or there is a Parkinson plus. There is a predominant lower body Parkinsonism. That means the patient is having difficulty in walking. The lower limbs is showing Parkinson features, but you are seeing that the saccades are normal. There is no tremor. There is not much rigidity in the upper limb. So this is called as lower body Parkinsonism. So if you get lower body Parkinsonism, then definitely you have to do the scan to look for any infarct or normal pressure hydrocephalus. If the patient is having liver disease, systemic illness, hyponatremia and other symptoms, again you have to do the scan of the brain. So the scan has to be selected depending on the case, the history and the examination finding. Blindly, every Parkinson patient should not be done an MRI scan of the brain. But MRI scan may be useful in some disorders. For example, if you look at PSP, PSP is progressive supranuclear gaze palsy, which I have already told. So in PSP, you will get the classical signs. So this is called as the hummingbird sign, where you will get the midbrain atrophy. This is the midbrain. You will get the Mickey Mouse sign here, and also it's called as the morning glory sign. So these three signs are classical of PSP. So this may be helpful in diagnosis of the patient. Similarly, there is something called as Pons midbrain ratio. So they take the ratio of the Pons, and this is the midbrain. So if you take this ratio, normally it is 0.24. So if it is reduced to 0.12, it is likely to be PSP. Similarly, there is something called as a MRI Parkinsonism index. So this is the formula, Pons divided by midbrain ratio into the middle cerebellar peduncle diameter and the superior cerebellar peduncle diameter. So if you get this ratio, if the ratio is more than 13.55, it is likely to be a PSP. So I just want to show that MRI has certain important things which can be illustrated in cases of atypical Parkinsonism. So it can be quite handy wherever you are having patients without features of idiopathic Parkinson disease. So all other Parkinsonism, it may be quite useful in the diagnosis. So you can see the Pons midbrain, and this is the superior cerebellar peduncle, and this is the inferior cerebellar peduncle, a middle cerebellar peduncle. So this ratio you can divide and you can find out the MRI Parkinsonism index. Similarly, certain signs are very classical. In the MSA, you get the hot cross bun sign. So you can see this. This is the crossing pontocerebellar fiber. So you can see this looks like a hot cross bun. So it's a type of bun. So this cross is called as the hot cross bun sign, which is classical of multi-system atrophy. And you can also see that this is the cerebellum. There is atrophy of the cerebellum here. Again, here you can see the hot cross bun sign is easily seen. You can see the hot cross bun sign, and there is cerebellar atrophy. Fourth ventricle is dilated. So all this suggests there is a multi-system atrophy-like syndrome. So MRI is quite useful in these disorders. In CBGD, I said there is cortical and basal ganglionic degeneration. So this is, you can see there is atrophy of the temporal lobe here and also parietal lobe here. So there is left-sided cortical atrophy, and this patient had an alien hand phenomena in the right side. So this coincided, and then this was diagnostic of CBGD. So this is about atypical Parkinsonism. Other syndromes may have very classical MRI features. For example, I spoke about iron deposition in the brain. So that is brain iron accumulation. So you can see this is the MRI scan, and you can see there is dark signals in the basal ganglia. So this is suggestive of brain iron accumulation, and there is a classical sign. There is brain iron accumulation, and inside this there is a gliosis which looks like an eye. So this is compared to the eye of tiger, which is classical of NBIA or Hellerwaden-Spatz disease. So this is called as the eye of tiger appearance. Similarly, in Wilson disease, this is the Wilson disease. You can see basal ganglia hyperintensities. And this is the classical sign in Wilson disease, which is called as the giant panda sign, which is seen in Wilson disease. Similarly, cyanide poisoning, you can see basal ganglia hyperintensities. If it is a carbon monoxide poisoning, for example, this patient was trapped inside the gas fumes, and you can see there is basal ganglia involvement. So all these patients present with acute evidence of Parkinsonism. So they'll be having severe rigidity, tremors, and altered mentation, and then you'll do the MRI, you'll get basal ganglia hyperintensities, and there is a history of toxin exposure. So these are all toxic basal ganglia involvement. Similarly, methanol poisoning. So we are having patients who take cheap alcohol from non-retail counters, and the ethanol will be mixed with methanol. So these patients will have methanol poisoning. They'll come with severe headache, convulsions, altered mentation, and you can see there is basal ganglia swelling bilaterally. They'll be having optic neuritis also, toxic optic neuritis with blindness. So this is classical of methanol poisoning. This is one important scenario, very well seen. So we see patients admitted, critical patients admitted in the ICU, patients having CKD, patients having history of alcohol intake, and then they develop hyponatremia, which are corrected by 3% normal saline. And after correction, you can see that either the patient develops a bulbar palsy with quadriparesis or a stiff limb with rigidity and tremors. So this syndrome is called as osmotic demyelination, which can affect the pons when it is called as central pontine CPM or central pontine osmolysis, or it can affect the basal ganglia when it is called as extra pontine myelinolysis. So sometimes it may be combined also, pons with basal ganglia. So this patient can present with a Parkinsonism-like feature. So this is one study which was done by me, almost 40 patients of central and extrapontine myelinolysis, which was published, and a lot of patients had tremors, rigidity, and all those manifestations of secondary Parkinsonism. So this will be a type of secondary or symptomatic Parkinsonism. Similarly, CLD patients can have manganese deposition in the brain. So you can see this is the MRI. And in the MRI, this is a sequence called as T1 sequence. So you can see the CSF is black, and the gray matter is gray, and the white matter is white. So you can see that there is deposition of metal here. So this is manganese. This is bright. So manganese deposition, we know that in liver failure, there is deposition of manganese in the brain. So this is called as non-Wilsonian hepatolenticular degeneration, which can again present with tremors, Parkinsonism-like features. And one more thing is manganese toxicity. So the city where I work is Durgapur. So there is a lot of steel plants here. So we had a few patients who presented with features of acute onset of Parkinsonism, tremors, rigidity and all. And this is one patient which I reported who had manganese toxicity because he was working in the steel welding industry, and so which is having a lot of manganese rich fumes which caused basal ganglia injury, and he had severe secondary Parkinsonism. So this could be one cause of Parkinsonism also. So whenever somebody has a rapid onset Parkinsonism with the memory loss and all those things, you ask the professional history of the patient, whether the patient is a farmer, where the patient works, whether there is any exposure to fumes, heavy metals, and all those things. So this is Huntington's disease, in which the patient will have psychiatric symptoms and features of chorea, Parkinsonism, and all. This condition should not be missed. So this is called as Creutzfeldt-Jakob or slow virus disease. So here again, MRI is very important. You can see this is the diffusion weighted image, and here you can see bilateral basal ganglia. There is hyperintensities which can be made out only in the diffusion weighted image. So in this patient, CT scan will be normal. So here's the diffusion weighted MRI will be quite handy in diagnosis of slow virus infection. This is again a CJD patient or slow virus patient. You can see there is bright signal in the basal ganglia, suggestive of cytotoxic edema involving the basal ganglia seen in slow virus or prion disease. Sometimes we see that patient with features of Parkinsonism, and when you do the CT or MRI, you'll see a lot of basal ganglia calcification. So we all know the differential diagnosis of bilateral basal ganglia calcification. It could be due to endocrine problem, it could be due to mitochondrial disorders, Fast disease, and so on. So this can again rarely present with features of Parkinsonism. So this is the only condition in which CT scan is better than MRI scan. So you can see the MRI scan in this patient of heart disease. So there is hyperintensities, and T2 there is hypointensity. And look at the, I think the CT is not there. The CTs can be easily showing the calcification. So whenever there is calcification, you are suspecting, CT will be the investigation of choice. So CT is the investigation of choice in calcification as well as bleeds. Now comes the two important scenario, which I already mentioned, that is the lower body Parkinsonism. So this patient presented with difficulty in walking, and you can see in the scan, there is multiple infarcts in the brain. There is diffuse white matter involvement and infarct. So this is suggestive of lower body Parkinsonism due to the infarct. So this is also called as vascular Parkinsonism. So it's a very, very common scenario, and we see it day in and day out in our patients, elderly patients who are diabetic with multiple vascular risk factors and walking difficulty. Most of them will have this sort of vascular Parkinsonism. So in these patients, MRI scan and CT scan may be quite helpful. Second important condition or a treatable cause of Parkinsonism with dementia is normal pressure hydrocephalus. So what is the classical triad of NPH, that is normal pressure hydrocephalus, can be remembered by DUG. So there will be dementia, which is subcortical dementia. There will be urinary incontinence and gait abnormality. And you can see in the CT scan, there is ventricular enlargement. There is not much of cortical atrophy. Some periventricular seepage is there. And if you look at the index, it's called as the Ritz index. You can see that the ratio is more than 0.3. So that is quite diagnostic of normal pressure hydrocephalus. So this condition, it is very important to diagnose because it is a treatable condition. And if you can do a ventricular peritoneal shunting, first you have to do a CSF drainage. You drain CSF on alternate days. And if you can see and demonstrate that the patient's gait, memory, and the urinary symptoms improves after the CSF drainage, so then you can you can plan the patient for a ventricular peritoneal shunting, and usually these patients improve a lot. So this condition should again not be missed. One very important situation is subdural hematoma. So it's a great mimic. I would say that subdural hematoma is a great mimic. Sometimes you get patient with headache, hemiplegia, seizures, and all those things. Sometimes the headache may be missing. There may be no history of fall. Headache may not be there. Patient simply comes with walking difficulties, some cognitive decline, and all those things. And when you do these MRI, so this is my patient only, you can see there is bilateral SDH. And the patient presented with a 2-month history of Parkinsonism and dementia-like feature. So whenever you get sudden onset of Parkinsonism, dementia, scan of the brain is required, especially to rule out treatable condition like subdural hematoma. This patient had toxoplasmosis, which again involved the basal ganglia and presented with tremors and difficulty in walking. So every tremor and difficulty in walking is not Parkinsonism. So if you get a rapid progression, rapid onset with memory loss and atypical features, immediately do the scan of the brain to rule out secondary causes. This patient was immunocompromised. This patient had a CNS lymphoma, again presenting with a dementia Parkinsonism-like feature. This is my own patient. So this patient presented with 3 months history of some memory loss, recent memory loss, and then gradually the memory loss progressed. And then last 2 weeks, he was not able to walk. He was having disbalance, required support to walk. Some headache was there, not much of headache. Otherwise, well-preserved patient. And then the scan, you can see there is diffuse involvement of the caudate nucleus, the basal ganglia structures, and contrast enhancement also there. So this patient had a malignancy. Biopsy was done, stereotactic biopsy was done, and then that showed a CNS tumor. So there are various conditions which can present with Parkinsonism features. So that is why I made this presentation, not just to highlight Parkinson disease, but also the mimics, which has to be evaluated. So to summarize, whenever you get this syndrome of Parkinsonism, you should do the blood counts. If it is idiopathic Parkinson disease, unilateral tremor, long duration, starting from one side, classical resting tremor, you need not do any investigation. If you're confident enough, you can start the medication. But if you get any atypical feature, you have to do the routine investigations. Get a sodium levels, because sometimes the sodium, low sodium levels can present with rigidity and difficulty in walking. And then the investigation has to be customized. If it's a young patient presenting with Parkinsonism features, dystonia and all those things, you have to rule out Wilson disease, then you do the Wilson disease workup. If you are having perioral symptoms, you are having self-mutilation, you are having chorea, then you have to rule out neuroacanthocytosis. You'll do the peripheral smear to rule out neuroacanthocytosis. If you are having thyroid problem and then the patient develops dementia with Parkinsonism, it could be Hashimoto's encephalopathy. Then you will do antithyroid antibodies. If you are suspecting slow virus infection, patient coming with severe memory loss and Parkinsonism, and you are getting this myoclonic jerks, then you suspect it's a slow virus infection. Then you can do the EEG also, which will show periodic discharges, which can help us in diagnosing slow virus infection. So the investigation has to be customized on the patient profile, the investigation, the examination findings, and your provisional diagnosis. You can investigate the patient. So this is basic things about the Parkinson's disease and Parkinsonism. And one important thing you can examine for the smell, because if it's a Parkinson disease, the smell will be lost. While in Parkinson plus and other types of Parkinsonism, usually the smell will be preserved. So it's a very important and handy bedside test which can be done. And last thing, I just introduced this dopamine transporter imaging. So there is something called as the TRODAT scan, which has come over, and it is available in our state also, though not widely available, but in some cases it can be quite useful. It is for marking the dopamine metabolism of the brain. So you can see this patient here, it is a normal brain. And in Parkinson disease, you can see the basal ganglia uptake is less compared to this side. So there is asymmetric reduction in the basal ganglia uptake in the right side, which could be quite suggestive of Parkinson disease. So it can be used sometime to differentiate from Parkinsonism from essential tremor and drug-induced Parkinsonism. And transcranial ultrasound is again one coming up investigation in which you can do the ultrasound transcranially and you can find out the hyperechogenicity of the substantia nigra, which can be helping in diagnosing Parkinson disease. So that's all from my end. I'd like to end my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your elaborated, brilliant presentation. Sir, question অনেক কোশ্চেন আছে, কিন্তু আসলে আমরা 3-4টার বেশি কোশ্চেন নিতে পারবো না, কারণ মানে যথেষ্ট রাত হয়ে গিয়েছে। স্যার, ফার্স্ট কোশ্চেন আপনার জন্য ডক্টর ফয়সাল আহমেদের, can Parkinson's be prevented?
See, the prevention of Parkinson disease, as I've already mentioned, there are 3 things which are been associated with low risk of Parkinson disease. One is physical activity. So if you are having regular exercises, regular physical activity, then definitely you can, that can help in reduction of the risk of Parkinson disease. Second is avoiding environmental risk factors like pesticides and also heavy metal fumes and the environmental factors which can cause secondary Parkinsonism. Apart from that, smoking and then coffee intake, they may be having detrimental effects. So that cannot be advised to the patient. So physical activity will be the best thing.
আমাদের সাথে আছেন প্রফেসর মতিউর রহমান স্যার। মতিউর রহমান স্যার, আপনি তো পুরোটা প্রেজেন্টেশন শুনেছেন। আমি স্যার আপনার ক্লিনিক্যাল এক্সপেরিয়েন্স থেকে স্যার, এত বছর যে আপনার এক্সপেরিয়েন্স, আমি আপনার এক্সপেরিয়েন্স থেকে স্যার আজকের পুরো প্রেজেন্টেশনের উপরে কিছু শুনতে যাচ্ছি। আপনি স্যার কিছু অ্যাড করবেন কিনা, বা আপনার এক্সপেরিয়েন্স থেকে যদি স্যার আপনি কিছু বলেন।
ধন্যবাদ এহসান। প্রফেসর প্রবীণ যে সুন্দর প্রেজেন্টেশন করছে, আমি তো খুব আশ্চর্য হয়ে গেলাম যে উনি এত সুন্দর করে এত ভাস্টলি পার্কিনসনিজম এবং পার্কিনসনিজম প্লাস এবং অন্যান্য মিমিক্স এত ডিটেইল আলোচনা করছেন। সুতরাং আমার তো বলার মতো আর কোনো শব্দই উনি বাকি রাখেন নাই। আর ওনার এক্সপেরিয়েন্স,
আপনার ক্লিনিক্যাল এক্সপেরিয়েন্স স্যার, আপনার।
হ্যাঁ, আমার ক্লিনিক্যাল এক্সপেরিয়েন্স ওনার মতোই, যে আমরা এরকম ইডিওপ্যাথিক পার্কিনসনিজমও পাই, আবার যে ভাস্কুলার পার্কিনসনিজম উনি যেটা বলছেন এটাও পাই, আবার মনে করেন যে পার্কিনসনিজম প্লাস এটাও পাই। মোটামুটি ভাবে ওনার এক্সপিরিয়েন্সের সাথে আমাদের এক্সপিরিয়েন্সের কিছু মিল আছে, তবে ওনার এক্সপিরিয়েন্স আমাদের থেকে অনেক বেশি, এটা নির্দ্বিধায় বলতে পারি।
স্যার তাহলে আমি আরো কিছু কোশ্চেন নেই স্যার।
নেন।
ডক্টর সোমেন দাসের একটা কোশ্চেন বেশ ইন্টারেস্টিং। স্যার আমরা জানি পার্কিনসনস ডিজিজ হয় মূলত ডিজেনারেশন অফ ডোপামিনার্জিক নিউরনের কারণে। তাহলে আমরা পিডি যদি সাসপেক্ট করি, তাহলে ডোপামিন লেভেল ইন ব্লাড দেখি না কেন? তাহলে এটা কি শুধু নিউরোট্রান্সমিটার রিলেটেড প্রবলেম?
That is a very good question. See, the primary target is the involvement of the pars compacta in the dopaminergic pathway. But we have seen that there are many other pathways which are also involved in this, because we know that there are a lot of premotor manifestations and also non-motor manifestations which are seen in Parkinson's disease. So it is not just the dopaminergic pathway which is getting affected. So that is why blood dopamine level may not be the ideal investigation in this patient, because there may not be a direct correlation between the blood dopamine level and the Parkinson's disease. However, it has been seen that if you do the dopamine transporter imaging, which I already showed, so that is called as the TRODAT scan. So that may be quite specific for Parkinson's disease in 90% of the patients. So that is, rather than doing the blood dopamine level, you can do the dopamine transporter imaging, which will show the whole pathway of the dopamine transporters. So that may be quite helpful.
থ্যাংক ইউ স্যার। ডক্টর সাইফুল্লাহর অনেকগুলো কোশ্চেন আছে। হ্যাঁ স্যার, প্লিজ স্যার, মতিউর স্যার যদি চ্যাট করেন।
ডক্টর প্রবীণ তো পরিষ্কার করে বলছেন ব্লাডে ডোপামিন বেশি পাওয়া যাবে না, তবে এটা আমার এসানের রোগের সাথে সম্পর্ক আছে। স্কিন বায়োপসি, রেকটাল বায়োপসি, এমনকি নেজাল যে অ্যানিউজমা ডেভেলপ করে, আলফা সাইনোক্লিওপ্যাথি, হ্যাঁ, সুতরাং এই জিনিসগুলো এইগুলো জায়গা থেকে আমরা ডিটেক্ট করতে পারি।
জি স্যার। স্যার ডক্টর সাইফুল্লাহর কিছু কোশ্চেন আছে। ফার্স্ট কোশ্চেন, হাউ সোডিয়াম ভ্যালপ্রুয়েট কজেস পার্কিনসনিজম? সেকেন্ড কোশ্চেন, আপনি যে স্যার বলেছেন হোয়াই এক্সারসাইজ রিডিউস দ্য রিস্ক অফ পার্কিনসনিজম। আর থার্ড কোশ্চেন, হোয়াট ইজ দ্য মোস্ট ইম্পর্টেন্ট প্যাথোগনোমিক or fundamental clinical feature of Parkinsonism?
Okay, so first is sodium valproate, mechanism of sodium valproate. So basically sodium valproate does not cause the classical Parkinsonism. So like the unilateral tremor, unilateral rigidity, that is not the classical presentation. Usually it causes bilateral symptoms. So you'll get bilateral rigidity and tremors. So mostly it will be a tremor dominant Parkinsonism. The mechanism is probably related to the multiple channels. As we all know, sodium valproate is an anti-epileptic agent. It has multiple effects on the calcium channel, sodium channel, and various other channels. So probably the calcium channel mediated effect has some effect on the basal ganglia, which causes the Parkinsonism features. Second is exercise related to the Parkinsonism. So as exercise, we have seen that in most of the degenerative disorders, be it Alzheimer's disease, be it Parkinsonism, lot of other, be it stroke. So exercise has a neuromodulatory effect on the brain. It affects the blood circulation and also the chemical balance in the brain. So probably it has a non-specific effect on the dopamine transporting levels in the brain. Third is the most important symptom of Parkinsonism. The most important symptom of Parkinsonism is bradykinesia. So in three of the criteria, the brain bank criteria, the MDS 2015 criteria, and also the NINDS criteria, the primary and the most important symptom is bradykinesia. So I've already told the slowness of the movements of the limbs and the movement, that is bradykinesia is the first symptom. Second most important is resting tremor. So bradykinesia and resting tremor are the fundamental features. And after that, you can look for the postural instability and other features.
মতিউর স্যার কি কিছু অ্যাড করবেন?
না, এটা উনি সঠিক বলছেন, প্রবীণ কুমার সঠিক বলছেন যে এটা ব্র্যাডিকাইনেশিয়া সব ক্রাইটেরিয়াতে ব্র্যাডিকাইনেশিয়া মাস্ট। পার্কিনসনিজম, ইডিওপ্যাথিক পার্কিনসনিজম ডায়াগনোসিসের জন্য ব্র্যাডিকাইনেশিয়া, সাথে যদি আদার যে 4টা বা 6টা ফিচার উনি বলছেন এর মধ্যে আরো যদি 1টা 2টা থাকে তাহলে মোটামুটি ভাবে এটা ডেফিনিট যে এটা পার্কিনসনস ডিজিজ।
মতিউর স্যার আপনার কাছে একটা কোশ্চেন করি স্যার, ডাক্তার মাহমুদুল হাসানের কোশ্চেন। স্যার, ক্যান পার্কিনসন লাইক ফিচার্স প্রেজেন্ট এট ইয়ং এজ? হোয়াট শুড বি আওয়ার অ্যাপ্রোচ?
ভেরি গুড কোশ্চেন। যে ইয়াং এজে এটা প্রবীণ অলরেডি বলে ফেলছে যে জুভেনাইল পার্কিনসনিজম হতে পারে, আবার মনে করেন যে আপনার 40-এর নিচে যেটা হয় আমরা বলি পার্কিনসনিজম এন্ড ইয়াং এজ। এসব ক্ষেত্রে আমরা কিছু কিছু ডিজিজ গুলো আমরা কনসিডার করি। মোস্ট ইম্পর্টেন্টলি কনসিডার করতে হয় যে উইলসনস ডিজিজ। আর এই যে যেটা উনি আরো বলছেন যে আয়রন ডিপোজিশন, তারপরে কপার ডিপোজিশন, তারপরে মনে করেন যে আপনার যে ম্যাঙ্গানিজ, তারপরে হলো যে টক্সিন ইনডিউসড পার্কিনসনিজম, মোস্ট ইম্পর্টেন্টলি হলো যে ইনকেফালাইটিস, পোস্ট ভাইরাল ইনকেফালাইটিস, বিশেষ করে জাপানিজ ইনকেফালাইটিস ইস্টার্ন ইন্ডিয়া এবং বাংলাদেশেও আছে। ইনকেফালাইটিসের পরে যে পার্কিনসনিজম ডেভেলপ করে এটাও গুরুত্ব দিতে হবে। সুতরাং এইসব জিনিস কনসিডার করে আমাদের অ্যাপ্রোচটা করতে হবে যদি ইয়াং পার্কিনসনিজম আমরা আমাদের কাছে আসে।
থ্যাংক ইউ স্যার। ডাক্তার প্রবীণ কি কিছু সাপ্লিমেন্ট করবেন?
এখন যে এ রয়েছে একটা নতুন গ্রুপ অফ এনসেফালাইটিস আছে, অটোইমিউন এনসেফালাইটিস। অটোইমিউন এনসেফালাইটিস মানে যে অটোইমিউন অ্যান্টিবডিজ লাইক NMDR অ্যান্টিবডিজ, VJKC অ্যান্টিবডিজ, এগুলো দিস ক্যান অলসো প্রেজেন্ট উইথ মুভমেন্ট ডিসঅর্ডার এন্ড দেন পার্কিনসনিজম, সিজার্স। তো এটাও মনে রাখতে হবে। থার্ড হচ্ছে জেনেটিক পার্কিনসনিজম। তো whenever there is less than 40 years Parkinsonism, তো জেনেটিক যে অটোসোমাল ডমিনেন্ট আমি বললাম, আলফা সিনুক্লিন বা LARC2 মিউটেশন বা অটোসোমাল রিসেসিভ পার্কিন মিউটেশন, এই জেনেটিক পার্কিনসনিজম ডায়াগনোস করতে হবে। আর হোল এক্সোম সিকোয়েন্সিং জেনেটিক স্টাডি অ্যাভেলেবল আছে, ওটা করলে কিন্তু এই সব টোটাল জেনেটিক প্যানেল গুলো আপনাদের পার্কিন মিউটেশনে চলে আসবে, ওটাও করতে পারেন।
থ্যাংক ইউ স্যার। মতিউর স্যার আপনার কাছে আবার একটা কোশ্চেন করি, পার্কিনসনিজমের রিজিডিটি কেন হয় বা ফ্রিজ কেন হয়, বা ফ্রিজি বা পেশেন্ট ফ্রিজ কেন হয় বা রিজিডিটি কেন হয়?
এটা তো একদম পরিষ্কার করে প্রবীণ বলে আসছে যে মেইন প্রবলেমটা হলো যে আপনার যখন এই যে সাবস্টেন্সিয়া নিগ্রার পার্স কম্প্যাক্টটা, এখান থেকে যে ডোপামিনটা যে রিলিজ হয়, এই ডোপামিন যখন রিলিজটা কমে আসছে, এই ডোপামিনের ডেফিসিয়েন্সি রেসপন্সিবল ফর দিস এই ফিজিডিটি, রিজিডিটি, ব্র্যাডিকাইনেশিয়া। এইটা মেইন প্রবলেমটা হলো ডিউ টু ডেফিসিয়েন্সি অফ ডোপামিন।
ডক্টর প্রবীণের কাছে আমি একটা কোশ্চেন করি, ডক্টর মুরাদের কোশ্চেন, হুইচ ক্লিনিক্যাল ক্লু টু সি টু থিঙ্ক প্রোগ্রেসিভ সুপ্রানিউক্লিয়ার পালসি, মাল্টিপল সিস্টেম অ্যাট্রোপি, পার্কিনসনিজম প্লাস সিনড্রোম?
আমি যে বললাম 4 ধরন পার্কিনসন প্লাস আছে। তো PSP, দ্যাট ইজ প্রোগ্রেসিভ সুপ্রানিউক্লিয়ার গেজ প্যালসি, এটার কিন্তু অনেকগুলো টাইপ আছে, 8টা টাইপ বলা হচ্ছে, কিন্তু যে ক্লাসিক্যাল পিএসপি আছে দ্যাট ইজ স্টিল রিচার্ডসন সিনড্রোম। ওটাতে যে ক্লাসিক্যাল ফিচার হয়, ফার্স্ট হচ্ছে ভার্টিক্যাল গেজ প্যালসি, তো ডাউন গেজ প্যালসি থাকবে। সেকেন্ড হচ্ছে রেকারেন্ট ব্যাকওয়ার্ড ফল উইদিন 1 year অফ দি ডিজিজ অনসেট। থার্ড হচ্ছে ফ্রন্টাল কগনিটিভ ডিক্লাইন, স্পিচ অ্যাবনর্মালিটি, একটা স্টারিং লুক থাকবে, আর পেশেন্ট মে হ্যাভ, এটাকে আমরা বলি রেট্রোকলিস, তো ঘাটটা এমনি সোজা হয়ে যাবে, তো রেট্রোকলিস, ঘাটটা স্ট্রেট। সো retrocolis, vertical gaze palsy, early backward falls, frontal lobe signs, and early bulbar involvement, subcortical cognitive involvement, এগুলো যদি হয় তো then you think of PSP. Multisystem atrophy, the classical feature is autonomic involvement. যদি early autonomic involvement হয়, যেরকম erectile dysfunction, and then postal imbalance, postal hypotension, bowel and urinary incontinence, along with Parkinsonism or cerebellar symptoms হলে MSA আমরা ডাউট করি। CBGD যে আছে, CBGD তে you will get cortical features, তো apraxia হবে, alien limb phenomena হবে, levitation হবে, unilateral asymmetric involvement হবে। CBGD যেরকম পার্কিনসন ওরকমই CBGD টাও unilateral, তো unilateral apraxic stiff myoclonic limb যদি হয় with cortical sensory involvement আর cortical symptoms, তো ওরকম হলে then you think of CBGD। আর DLBD হচ্ছে fourth number, DLBD তে you will get dementia, visual hallucinations, fluctuating cognition, so কখন patient may be good and then in the same day the patient may be having a fluctuating cognition, so যদি এগুলো হয় then you think of diffuse Lewy body disease. These are the 4 common types of Parkinson disease, Parkinson plus.
স্যার লাস্ট দুইটা কোশ্চেন আমরা নিব, তারপর আমরা কোশ্চেন আনসার পর্ব শেষ করব। স্যার ডক্টর ফাতিমার কোশ্চেন, ক্যান স্লিপ প্রবলেমস ইন পেশেন্টস উইথ পার্কিনসনস ডিজিজ বি অ্যাবাউট সেরোটোনিন? মানে স্যার স্লিপ প্রবলেমস এর সাথে সেরোটোনিনের রিলেশনের জন্য হচ্ছে, বা এটা কারণটা কি?
এটা কি স্যারকে জিজ্ঞেস করেছেন কি আমাকে?
স্যার যে কোনো একজন বললেই হবে স্যার।
আপনি বলেন।
হ্যাঁ, as I already told, Parkinson's শুধু dopaminergic pathways involved হয় না, now it is seen that serotonergic pathways are also involved, so sleep problem may be a very early manifestation of Parkinson disease. As I already told, alpha synuclein হলে RBD, that is REM behavioral disorder, may be the first manifestation, তারপরে insomnia হতে পারে, restless leg syndrome which could be related to dopaminergic deficiency, PLMS, that is periodic limb movement disorder, এগুলো এই 4-5টা স্লিপ প্রবলেমস মে বি এ ভেরি প্রমিনেন্ট ম্যানিফেস্টেশন অফ পার্কিনসন ডিজিজ। এটাতে REM behavioral disorder should be very important. যখনই REM behavioral disorder হয়, তো we can predict that this patient may develop Parkinson disease or other synuclein disorder within the next 5 to 10 years, almost 60 to 80%. So it may be a very important prognostic marker early on.
তার লাস্ট কোশ্চেন মতিউর রহমান স্যারের কাছে, বেশ ইন্টারেস্টিং কোশ্চেন, ডক্টর সাইফুল আলমের, why essential tremor is called essential?
Very peculiar question.
জি স্যার।
এটা যে এসেনশিয়াল, মানে এটা অ্যাকচুয়ালি হলো, তো আপনারা বুঝে ফেলছেন যে এসেনশিয়াল ট্রেমরটা কি জিনিস। তো এটা এসেনশিয়াল মানে এই জন্যই নামটা আসছিল যে এটার কারণটা কি, কারণটা পাওয়া যাচ্ছিল না। তো এখন বোঝা যাচ্ছে যে এটা তো অ্যাকচুয়ালি এজ রিলেটেড আছে, অথবা আপনার যে ফ্যামিলিতে হিস্ট্রি থেকেও হয়, আর কিছু কিছু ক্ষেত্রে ইডিওপ্যাথিকও হয়। সেই হিসেবে এই নামটা আসছিল, এটা নামটা আসছে, নামটা এখনো রয়ে গেছে। যদিও এসেনশিয়াল ট্রেমারটাই এখনটার নাম, এখন আর সেনাইল ট্রেমারটা এখন আর বলা হচ্ছে না। প্রবীণ কিছু যোগ করবেন?
Sir, essential tremor is basically because the etiology is not known, idiopathic. এখন অনেকগুলো জিন স্টাডিজ হচ্ছে যেটাতে they are locating genes for essential tremor. Essential tremor আপনার যে location of lesion is in the Gillen-Mollaret triangle. একটা ব্রেন স্টেমের জায়গায় একটা ট্রায়াঙ্গেল আছে, রেড নিউক্লিয়াস আর অলিভারি নিউক্লিয়াস আর ডেন্টেড নিউক্লিয়াসের ওখানে, it's called as the Gillen-Mollaret triangle. So that is the site of location of involvement in the essential tremor. So because the cause is not known, it is called as essential. But however, এখন genetic study গুলো করে essential tremor, we are able to find out the cause. 60 to 70% there is a family history in essential tremor, and essential tremor can occur in early age also. Family history থাকলে it can occur in 40 years and before that also. So it's not essentially in old age, it can occur in younger age also. The clinical clues are head tremor, যেটা আমি বললাম, if there is head tremor and if there is associated jaw tremor and limb tremor, symmetric hobe, du hatei hobe, and then postural tremor. So if that is there, then we think it is a essential tremor. And family history will be there, and then there will be response to alcoholism. So if alcohol intake is there, the tremor will reduce. So that is again suggestive of essential tremor.
থ্যাংক ইউ স্যার। আমাদের আরেকটা রিকোয়েস্ট থাকবে, আপনি যদি আমাদেরকে পার্কিনসন্স এর উপর কোনো ভিডিও প্রোভাইড করতে পারেন, আপনার নিজের পেশেন্ট বা নিজের চেম্বার থেকে, যে আসলে ব্র্যাডিকাইনেস সেটা কিভাবে দেখাবে, বা জেনারেল বা স্টুডেন্টসদের জন্য ট্রেমরটা কিভাবে দেখাবে, এরকম একটা ভিডিও যদি আমাদের বিডি ফিজিশিয়ানস এর জন্য আপনি দিতে পারেন আপনার চেম্বার সেটআপে, তাহলে এটা সবার জন্য খুব উপকার হবে।
শিওর শিওর শিওর।
কারণ ভিজুয়ালাইজ করার এটা আলাদা। স্যার আমরা
আর একটা কোশ্চেন ছিল স্যার, স্যার একটা কোশ্চেন ছিল কি ডিপ ব্রেন স্টিমুলেশন কি রকম প্ল্যান করতে হয়? How do I know if I am a candidate for deep brain stimulation?
এই উত্তরটা দিয়ে দেন।
ঠিক আছে, এটা আমি লাস্ট কোশ্চেন will answer. So deep brain stimulation, that is a very important question. So deep brain stimulation is not done in all the Parkinson disease. There are two schools of thought. One is early deep brain stimulation and second is late deep brain stimulation after 10 years. So এখানে যখন যে প্র্যাকটিস হচ্ছে, ইউজুয়ালি আমরা ইন্ডিয়াতে ইউজুয়ালি লেট ডিপ ব্রেন স্টিমুলেশন করি। ইউজুয়ালি টিপিক্যাল পার্কিনসন ডিজিজ হু আর হ্যাভিং গুড রেসপন্স টু লিভোডোপা, যে ভালো রেসপন্স আসছে লিভোডোপাতে, আর দি পেশেন্টস হু আর ডেভেলপিং লিভোডোপা ইনডিউস ডিসকাইনেসিয়া লাইক মোটর ফ্লাকচুয়েশন, ওষুধ দেওয়ার পরে there is frequent on off, the medicines are not acting properly, there is erratic response to the medications, without any dementia, without much of postural involvement, without any features of Parkinson plus. After excluding all other disorders, you can select the patient very selectively, and then you can send for deep brain stimulation. So it is basically Parkinson disease after 8 to 10 years who are having poor drug response or who are having side effects related to the medications. Then you can send the patient for deep brain stimulation. It should be idiopathic Parkinson disease and not Parkinson plus. So you have to exclude Parkinson plus. There should not be any dementia, cognitive decline, or severe postural impairment. The patient should be ambulant, not bedbound. So these patients, after careful selection, you can do the deep brain stimulation. But the selection has to be correctly done because it's a very costly surgery. And then if you are unable to deliver the goods, then it may give rise to a problem.
প্রবীণ, আমার একটা কোশ্চেন ছিল। আমি একবার ইউরোপিয়ান একটা কনফারেন্সে গেছিলাম, ওনাদের মত হলো যে আলডি স্টিম যদি করা যায় তাহলে সেক্ষেত্রে মানে আপনার বেড বাউন্ড বা হুইল চেয়ার বাউন্ডটা লেট হয়। তো আপনারা তো করতেছেন যে লেট 10 ইয়ার্স পরে।
হ্যাঁ স্যার, এখন পর্যন্ত লেট আছে স্যার, কিন্তু আর্লি স্টিম যে স্টাডি আছে, দে হ্যাভ পুট আর্লি পেশেন্টস। So probably aste aste we will start doing patients in the early stage itself. Maybe the trend will change gradually.
ঠিক আছে, এটা জানার জন্য।
হ্যাঁ স্যার,
তাহলে আমরা শেষ করে দেই। বাংলাদেশের দর্শক শ্রোতা যারা আপনারা আজকে আমাদের এই বিডি ফিজিশিয়ানের অনুষ্ঠানের সাথে ছিলেন, আপনারা মোটামুটি এনলাইটেন হয়ে গেছেন পার্কিনসন সম্বন্ধে। আর আমার ধারণা যে ডক্টর প্রবীণ বাংলাদেশের ডাক্তারদের মধ্যে একটা লেকচার দিয়েই মনে হয় যে জনপ্রিয়তার তুঙ্গে উঠে গেছেন। আমরা আশা করব ডক্টর প্রবীণ যেন মাঝে মাঝে আমাদের এখানে এই ফোরামে আসেন এবং আমাদের আরো এনলাইটেন করেন। এই বলে আমি আমার বক্তব্য শেষ করছি এবং অনুষ্ঠান শেষ করার অনুরোধ করছি।
থ্যাংক ইউ স্যার। থ্যাংক ইউ স্যার।